racism is a prevalent problem in our society. This is obvious to anyone who's been alive for any real number of years on planet Earth. We sadly divide ourselves by our skin colour and treat ourselves poorly based on it. This is no news to anyone, but I wanted to touch upon a story that I saw as a football fan, actually, in the sporting world, which I thought was quite interesting and provides some lessons to us all. So I'm going to read a little bit from an article here. In Serie A, which is the Italian Premier League, essentially, Italian First Division, Juventus teenage forward Moise Kean was subjected to racist abuse by Cagliari fans. But sealed victory, 5 minutes in time, yada yada yada. So essentially, Kean was racially abused in a game. It says, after scoring, Kean, who was born in Italy to Ivorian parents, turned to the home fans and folded his arms. In response, Cagliari supporters made the noise, which is described by Italian media as a boo and is regarded as a racist insult in Italian football. Monkey noises could also be clearly heard among the crowd. And they link the video. I'll link it in the description so you can see it all. Juventus midfielder Blaise Matuidi protested furiously to the referee and at one point appeared to threaten to walk off. The Frenchman complained last year that he was subject to racist abuse at the same stadium, and Cagliari later apologised. Play was halted for around 3 minutes and a warning was broadcast to the crowd, the first step in a so-called three-step procedure that ultimately leads to the teams being led off the field. Yet Juventus player Leonardo Bonucci criticised Kean, his 19-year-old teammate, for his reaction. According to Football Italia, the defender said, Kean knows that when he scores a goal, he has to focus on celebrating with his teammates. He knows he could have done something differently too. There were racist cheers after the goal. Blaise heard it and was angered. I think the blame was 50-50 because Moyes shouldn't have done that and the Curva should not have reacted that way. The Curva obviously being the Cagliari fans. We are professionals. We have to set the example and not provoke anyone. So that's the segment of the article I wanted to focus on. Essentially, Bonucci's words. Racism in football has been around for decades. There's always been a right-wing populace within football that has dedicated themselves to jeering and abusing non-white footballers, especially in countries like Italy, where there has been a rather large presence of right-wing fan groups, and subsequently there have been fewer non-white players playing in the division. In fact, Moise Kean is one of the first black players to play for Italy, and it was only, I think, 2010 or 11 that the first black player made their debut for Italy, which is pretty staggering when you think about how long there have been black people in Europe for. But the abuse obviously isn't good to see and shows where we are as a society, where the not only is this still going on, but it's actually being emboldened by the general decay of capitalist society into further realms of bigotry and further fascist tendencies. But what we also see is the awful rhetoric and mindset of someone who should have been defending Kean, namely his teammate Leonardo Bonucci. Now, Bonucci is a very good player. He's one of the top defenders on the planet. He plays for Juventus, who are the best team in Italy by a long way, and the Italian national team, who are one of the traditionally the best national sides on the planet. And he's at least a decade older than Kean. He should be the older player, the senior player, to stand up for their teammate and support them. And instead, he's coming out with the blame 50-50. We've got to not provoke anyone, which is the exact rhetoric which racism thrives off. The people who know that racism is bad, but don't do anything about it, but are more interested in civility and things being easy for them than they are addressing the racism and actually sorting out a problem. You look at this scenario. This young man who is playing in a country where he's obviously grown up. It's his country, yet is being treated like a foreigner, like someone who doesn't deserve to be there, which is obviously nonsense in and of itself, but is being treated like some sort of non-human entity within their realm, and it's up to his teammates to sort of show solidarity, like Matuidi did, by saying this isn't on, we need to stop this, and actually doing something to cause a scene. And instead you've got this apologetics for the racism by equating it to Kean's reaction. Kean, whose only reaction, by the way, was to, show defiance to the blatantly racist and hostile crowd who are, clearly abusing him, and not even doing it in a particularly outlandish way. He's just playing his football. He's scoring goals. He's a young, talented player, and thus is doing what he is doing for his team. And simply by showing the refusal to stand down to this racism, he's getting criticised by his own teammates. He's been criticised by Bonucci, who, as a white person, should be using his privilege and his afforded status in that scenario to make it clear that he won't stand for it, to use his social status to improve things for his teammates. And instead, you're seeing him come out with this nonsense. We are professionals. We have to set the example. Well, what better example could it be to abate racism by refusing to give it any credence, by treating it as the abhorrent thing that it is, by standing up for your black teammate that's been abused, and showing that the crowd of fans were completely in wrong. And instead, he's fueled their fire. He's made it clear that it's a debate instead of a clear shutdown of the racism. And he's on the same team as Kean. Even if you ignore the racism for a second, this is a young player who's on your team, and you're ignoring him and playing him down and being pretty condescending and insulting to them over the sake of appeasing fans you're against anyway. Rival fans. It's absurd. And it just goes to show a clear example of how white people, when they aren't actively, fighting against the structural and societal racism that was, plaguing our society, and really any privileged group, when they, are confronted with marginalisation and confronted with the abuse and bigotry which, is lining our world, when they act like this, when they try and play it off as a, a both sides scenario in the face of clear and obvious bigotry, when they, condone the other person's, other people's antics through their, apologetics for it, they're only harming the situation. They're making it worse. They're part of the bigotry through their own, unattested bigotry. You can guarantee Bonucci has never faced racist abuse. You can guarantee he's never come across that level of discrimination, because, there's no way anyone who is, going to respond to that, has been through it, would ever do the sort of thing that he did, or say the things he did. Matuidi, a fellow black player, was quick to see that it was wrong and was quick to act. The senior player in that incident, Matuidi, did the right thing. Bonucci is another senior player, and he should have done similar. He should have been wise enough and good enough to take a stand alongside Kean and support him in the after-match comments. And instead, we've got this nonsense quote where he reaffirms the racism by treating it as equal, treating anti-racism as the same as racism. You can only imagine the effect this has on Kean, who is having to now go back into a dressing room where the senior players don't have his back, where they are quite happy to stand by and let racism slide just to look civil. It's absurd. It's just ridiculous. And frankly, it shows that we still have so far a way to come in society, because Bonucci is far from the only white person to have such an attitude. There are many examples of people, more comfortable with turning on their, fellow black people, their friends and their associates, for speaking out against racism than they are confronting racism themselves by speaking out against it. There always has to be this idea of an equal sides and two parties being the same, despite the clear wrongness of one side, the clear and obvious antipathy the racists hold towards the person who's done nothing wrong, Kean. And Kean's reaction, by the way, isn't even particularly, in terms of football celebrations, going to the away fans and celebrating is something that lots of players do. It's, interesting to me that the one time a footballer speaks out against celebrating in front of the away fans is the time it's the young black guy celebrating in spite of the racism being hurled towards him. It just goes to show not only the problems of racism and the structural faults that we have in that we allow civility to trump justice, but also the the ideas that racism has to be, you know, stomped out. It can't be, you know, pandered to like Bonucci has done. Otherwise, you're just going to see incidents like this happen again and again. And it's no surprise that Italian football is so laden with racist incidents like this. You know, Kean is far from the first player to be abused in this division, and he probably won't be the last, because for as long as people like Bonucci and, you know, fans that are willing to turn a blind eye to it simply because they want to maintain civil conversations and, you know, public decency, you're always going to see racists emboldened and thus able to have the agency to do their atrocious actions. Kean, obviously, you know, has done nothing wrong, should be celebrated, and frankly, any footballer, any person who isn't willing to stand alongside him needs to think, you know, what am I saying by this? Well, who am I siding with when I try and make an issue of racism a multifaceted thing? Ultimately, it should be obvious to everyone where the justice is, and it should be clear how we go forward from here. You know, zero tolerance of racism wherever we see it on any level, and that can be, you know, the instigator of so much difference if we make that the case.